As the god of the sun rose and crept his way across the horizon to seek for his cold-eyed bride the moon, the farmer would curse the young cockerels that woke him. They had cuckala-cuckala-cooed their way through the night, each one calling louder than the other, each one cuckala-cuckala-cooing to get his attention. And he had tried his best to ignore them, but he knew better than to keep his cows, sheep and corn waiting, just waiting for him to arise late. In that place between sleeping and waking and dreaming, and safe in the warmth of his blankets, he could tell the hour of every day and every season, no matter how dark or how light it was. No matter what the season, he knew the hour, and he also knew when it was time to roll over and when it was time to get up and work. Now he was up, and he could tell by the smell of the air or the rustle of the trees, and he knew that he could have had a few more soft moments wrapped in the arms of his wife. In this entire world he did not really need a cockerel's crow to wake him, but he knew that if there were no cockerel, then there would be no peace in the coop, for the hens would cluck and cackle at one another, and peck and scratch at more than the ground. By the bleak light of the moon, by the harsh heat of the day, as the sun spread his fingers through the shade of the bushes and briars, they, the hens, would fight amongst themselves for the want of some comfort from a proud coxcombed king of the farm. He knew that if they weren't happy, then there would be no eggs to eat. Worst of all, there would be no eggs to put into the fine, heavy, honeyed cakes his wife would make for him. And if there was one thing that he liked better than anything than his wife's cake, then it was more cake. When he was sitting taking a rest in the shade of a crumbling wall, he would be licking at his fingers as the honey tried to escape his tongue. No greater pleasure in this hot and dry place could ever surpass cake. What they did have was not so much a king, not even a prince. A duke would have been ashamed to be linked to this excuse of a cockerel. He was the best that the farmer could buy. Actually, I tell you a lie when I say buy. He was given, almost as a joke, by the hen woman when she wanted to get rid of it. "He's yours for the price of a kiss," she had cackled when she handed over this poor specimen of a cockerel. "Just a little kiss. A peck on the cheek for the king of the hens." Her laughter was sweet to the old farmer, and the thought of brushing his lips against the smooth powdered cheek of the hen woman when his wife wasn't looking made his heart beat faster. In his time, the poor cockerel, who called the farmyard his kingdom, had been a good father to all of the chickens that scurried about in the dust of the farmyard. He had been a good husband to his great harem of hens. He was attentive and caring in the way that no haughty, broad-chested bantam would have taken the time to even think of. But now he was getting old. Now he was past what little best he had left in his bones and feathers. When he first arrived amongst the flurry of hens, they had been glad for his company, but now there were other, younger, stronger birds who were trying to impress, and succeeding. It was only by comparison with these growing birds that he seemed so far from what they wanted. He was good enough when there were no others, but surrounded by his younger, stronger offspring, he was not allowed to touch or preen those that had lusted for his company. In all of this sadness that he had always known, he had always looked to the farmer and watched and waited and remembered all of the jobs and tasks that he needed to do. What was even more important was the fact that he had learned the rhythm of the farmer's day. He had committed to his mind the flow of the seasons and the time of day that the farmer needed to be awoken. I would never be so foolish to say that the farmer liked to be awoken. This cockerel had a greater knowledge of what and how the farmer needed to organise than he had himself. Before the flock of his fine young sons would push him out of the way, the old one, for he was old now, the old one would wait until he knew what was the right time to wake the farmer before he would crow his distinctive "Cuckala-cuckala-cackala-coo." He would cry at just the right time. His was not the strongest of voices. His was not the deepest of voices. His was the voice that he had been given, and he tried his best to do what was needed of him, to call the farmer to wake. Yuckala cackala crackala coo, yuckala cuckala crackala coo. This was not the finest of voices, but it was enough to wake the farmer in as close to a good mood as was possible. Yuckala cuckala crackala coo, he would cry. In the winter, it would still be dark when he crowed his call. In the summer, the sun would have arisen for hours before he would make his chanticleer call, always knowing that it was not the dawn's light that needed to be heeded to start a call for the farmer. I am not saying that the old man rose with happiness in his heart, and it wouldn't be the first time that a boot or a shoe or a chamber pot would be thrown out to get him to quieten his call. But the farmer knew that a call from this poor king of the coop meant that he had no choice but to get up. And even on the coldest of days, it would mean that there was always going to be honey cake for dinner. In some ways, they'd become what some would call friends. The farmer would often curse the cockerel and place his huge, scratched, work-worn fingers into a heavy hammer of a fist and curse, "The pot's not too small for you, you spoiler of dreams." And of course the old cockerel knew that this was the time to hide under the dry, splintered boards of the farmhouse until the honey cake had had its effect. Sometimes the cockerel would wander away from the clucking of the hens, and the farmer would put a small, and I mean a small, piece of the cake down for him to share. The farmer's voice would be smooth with the honey at his throat. "You know, old friend," he would wipe the sticky crumbs from his chin and hand the scraps to his waiting tongue. "You know, old friend, you and I are so alike. I have my wife, and you have your wives. She is always calling me lazy, but I know that she likes me. I think that she loves me. You have all of the hens. You, who would have been in the pot 100 dawns ago if that hen woman hadn't given you to me. Given you to me for..." He started to talk as if he were in a fine dream. "If she hadn't have given you to me for the price of a kiss." From behind the hedge by the edge of the wall, a small, high, cackling laugh could be heard as that eavesdropper of a hen woman heard what he was saying. She was skipping out of sight before he had a chance to deny what he had said. He stood up, indignant and embarrassed, but secretly pleased that she had heard him, and he brushed the crumbs of cake from his shirt and returned to his plough. It is one thing to call when it is time to call, but it is another to know when to cease your crowing. If the cockerel could have spoken, he would have known that it was never the time to talk about the way that the farmer looked and thought about the hen woman. He knew it was his job to wake the farmer once. It was his job to make his noise once when the time was right, and at no other time. Yuckala cuckala crackala coo. If only it had been so with all of his fine young sons. As they grew, they would watch him as he tried to teach them how to crow so that it was not too long, so that it was not too loud, so that it was not too high. He had the sense to go away from the farmyard and find a sheltered place and take them where they could not be heard with their practising. Sometimes, and this is a hurtful thing to say, his young sons would laugh at the way that he crowed in the morning. And this is an even worse thing to say, for those hens that had been glad of his company when they had no other, they would mutter amongst themselves out loud and in his hearing, that they had never thought that much about his crowing. The strength that we find in ourselves can be hard to find, but he would pay no heed to their bickering and try his best to teach his children well. Every time he would say to his young sons, "Yeah."